everyone, and welcome to Literary Nights with Unsolicited Press. Today we have three fabulous readers, Matt Daly, Dave Rosenheim, and Beau Bernstein. But before we get started, I want to remind you to smash the like button. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, please subscribe and like. And also, if you want to leave comments, we'll be able to see them. Or if you want to ask questions, we'll be able to see them and everybody, and then I will put them on the screen so that everyone else can see them as well. So welcome to tonight's edition of Literary Nights with Unsolicited Press. We're going to go in alphabetical order as we usually do, and we're going to start with Beau Bernstein this evening. So welcome to everyone, and welcome to our three fabulous readers. Beau, would you like to start?
Sure, I'd be happy to. My name is Beau Bernstein. My debut novel, Shotgun Woman, is available now everywhere books are sold, almost everywhere books are sold. Just launched on August 6th. So I did a reading in April. So super excited to have another one now that it's out. Before I jump into the reading, just a bit of context, a bit of setup to help everyone understand where I'm beginning, because this is a novel, and a bit of setup, I'm sure, goes a long way. So the setting for my book, it is 1953. It's a rural farming community, small town Texas. Chapter 1 finds our main character, the titular character, Eudora Burleson, at the funeral of her husband, who has recently turned up dead under very suspicious circumstances. Over the next couple chapters, we're introduced to some of the rumors that are swirling around town about what went down, but the general consensus is foul play. There had recently been a very divisive race for local office. Battle lines were drawn. Now Mr. Burleson's dead, leaving his opposition uncontested in the upcoming election. It all seems a bit too convenient. Of course, Eudora has her own theories, and earlier in this chapter, she actually goes into town to chase down a few leads, and inevitably ends up raising a little hell while shaking down some townsfolk who are withholding key information. She causes quite a scene. Now Dora is smart enough to know that word in town travels fast. And while she may be hot-headed, she's a very formidable strategist as well. So she caused a commotion in town on purpose with a very specific intent in mind. She's wagering that her actions might draw out some of the conspirators connected to her husband's murder. So tonight's reading begins as we find Dora waiting expectantly at her house way out in the country, hoping that her enemy is foolish enough to fall for her trap and reveal themselves in the flesh. So that's where I will pick up. So that evening, as the sun yawned long behind the towering oak trees in the yard, Dora lounged in her old wicker rocking chair on the front porch. At her feet, the Great Danes dozed in quiet little whimpers. In this way, idling away the hours since she'd returned, Dora had watched the shadows cast by the fence as they stretched out further and further beneath the clouds painted in the shifting palettes of dusk. In the trees, the Spanish moss swayed aloft in the passing breeze as night made its slow approach, like some great creature, old and ancient. Flitting here and there, the mockingbirds filled the final stages of light, flashing their white underfeathers and singing sweet and lonesome songs. Setting her glass down on the side table, Dora adjusted the shawl draped over her lap. Between her legs was a fully loaded .38 Special, a snub-nosed revolver, perfect for getting up close and personal. Quickly, she double-checked that the safety was off, then covered it over again. Just then, off in the distance, Dora swore she heard the unmistakable sound of car tires shambling down the old country road. With a sudden start, the dogs' heads popped up from the flagstone. Their eyes wide and alert, they gazed fixed towards the street beyond the fence. "Well, I'll be goddamned," Dora muttered as a sheriff's cruiser slowly pulled into view. For a moment, at the stone entryway, the car sat idle. Though she could not make out the person in the driver's seat, Dora could feel their gaze upon her. After a short while, the car began creeping down the drive towards the front porch. Rising to their feet, the Danes yawned and began drifting out into the yard beneath the dying light of day. "Hey, easy now," Dora said firmly. "Come." With tails wagging, the Danes soon turned back and sat obediently beside their master. The car still approaching, they nuzzled at her hand, hungry for a treat. Down, she commanded. With a deep groan, the dog settled back at her feet, facing out towards the yard. Finally, the squad car came to a dusty stop in front of the porch. The driver's side door swung open. Sheriff Hinckley emerged. Adjusting his gun belt around his ballooning gut, he took in a deep snort of air before slamming the car door behind him. The polished spurs affixed to his boots rattled with every step. Without a word, he slowly moseyed up the walkway. His presence was one of power and intimidation, but Dora was having none of it. Beneath her sunglasses, she remained, etched in stone. "Well, howdy, Miss Dora," Hinckley finally said, tipping his hat. "Fine evening, ain't it?" "Certainly was." Unflinching, Hinckley smiled wide, revealing a gold-framed tooth glinting out from the dark recesses of his mouth. Then, placing both thumbs behind his belt, he raised his boot and brought it down with a hefty stamp upon the porch. Without reply, Dora continued rocking steadily in her chair, squeezing the revolver tight between her legs. "Well, okay then, Dora, if that's how it's going to be," Hinckley grumbled, looking out over the pasture. "I was just coming by to—" "You sure came out your way," Dora interjected. Removing his old Stetson with a scoff, Hinckley slicked back the thin hair clinging to his skull and fanned himself for a moment before placing it back atop his head. "Excuse me?" he retorted. "I said you sure came out your way," Dora repeated, louder this time. "A little late in the day for police business, or is this business more personal, off the record?" "Well, I wish it was," Hinckley began with a modest chuckle. "But no, unfortunately. You see, I got a call today, Dora. Said a white-haired woman and her colored accomplice were down around Main Street flashing pistols, threatening citizens, and generally causing one hell of a scene." "The police got a call or you got a call?" Dora said. Again, the sly grin flashed the golden tooth. "Well, in case you forgot," Hinckley said, tapping the badge pinned to his chest, "I am the police, Dora." "Well, you had me fooled," Dora snapped back. "When Barrett died, you was a mighty hard man to find. I was calling and calling, but they tell me, Hinckley, he ain't got the time. Murder in cold blood in a little town like Wheaton, but you ain't got the time? You'd think a sheriff up for re-election would be chomping at the bit to get his hands on a case like that, but I guess you had better things to do. Of course, now some dummy pay you a prank call, and here you are. Come running like a good dog. Guess all I had to do was whistle." "Dora, you best mind yourself now," warned Hinckley, narrowing his eyes upon her. "Remember who you talking to. Now, I apologize if you disagree with the facts, but darling, that don't change the facts of what happened. Sometimes there ain't no rhyme or reason. Your husband was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hit the biggest deer out of Wheaton County in 10 seasons. Yeah, and where's that deer now?" Dora prodded. "It's roadkill, Dora," Hinckley pleaded with an air of offense at the question. "It was disposed of. Now, I looked at all the evidence personally, and ain't nothing led me to believe there was no foul play involved. Now, that's just the way it is, and you can take it or leave it for all I care." Dora grunted incredulously. "Well, I guess I'll leave it then." "Well, I understand you upset, Dora. Hell, I don't blame you for it. But I can't have nobody, no matter how upset they are, thinking they can come into my town pulling pistols on everyday folk." In the yard, a gentle wind shifted through the treetops as the Danes lifted their great heads to taste the scent of the evening. Standing just before them, Hinckley reached out his hand, but instinctively the dogs recoiled from his touch. "Well, I don't know nothing about that," Dora grumbled. "I was sat right here with the dogs all damn day." "Is that right?" Hinckley said, resting his great forearms atop his knee. "Now choose your words real careful, Dora. Wouldn't want to be lying to me now." "I was sat right here all damn day," Dora repeated. "Boy, somebody sure made a fool out of you. Got the sheriff himself come out here chasing goose with all his precious time." "You sure about that?" Hinckley fired back. "'Cause I got eyewitness says you sped off from Ray's place in Barrett's old Cadillac. Matter of fact, I think I'll take a gander in your garage to see if I ain't mistaken." With challenge in his eyes, Hinckley drug his boot heel off the porch and began to move around back. Triggered to action, the Danes rose to their feet in a flash. Standing like sentinels before him, the gentle warmth in their eyes was suddenly gone, replaced by a testy readiness. "Not before I get a look at a warrant, you don't," Dora muttered coolly. "'Less you ain't got one, that is." Frozen before the Danes, Hinckley snapped his eyes back towards Dora. You know, I was hoping we could be civil about this, Dora, he seethed between pursed lips. I really was. Wishful thinking, I suppose. Well, if we ain't being civil, what you want to be instead? At this, Hinckley snorted with a genuine amusement. She truly was as feral as they claimed. You got me all wrong, Dora. Now I know your husband and I had our. Here he paused, searching the air for the right word. Our disagreements. But that's because we just two men of principle. Different principles, of course, but two sides of the same coin, you understand? Now I didn't come all the way out here to convince you one way or the other. It don't matter to me none. I came here to tell you I won't be standing for no more trouble from you. And that's the bottom line. Not in my town. I catch you walking my streets with a pistol again, there's gonna be hell to pay. Now that's for your own good, believe me. Oh, I don't need nobody looking out for me, Dora said with a knowing smile. I can handle mine myself. Well, I beg to differ, Burleson, Hinckley chuckled. Lonely old widow like you way out here all by yourself? Boy, I bet the nights are mighty dark out here. Yeah, dark don't bother me none. Well, Hinckley said, his smile fading, I know you fancy yourself about as tough as a 10-cent steak, but ain't nothing can survive out here all alone. At this, Hinckley turned his head up towards the sky. Far off in the clouds, a pair of vultures soared big, arcing circles above them. Not even the buzzards, he continued. I reckon you must be what? About 2 hours from the nearest hospital out here, ain't that right? More or less, Dora grumbled. More or less. Well, suppose something happened to you way out here, Dora. Who'd come to help you? Nobody. Save for the coyotes, that is. Of course, I reckon they'd pick your bones clean by sunup. If Dora was frightened, she hid it well. Hinckley felt as if he was talking to a brick wall. Sensing that an impasse had been reached, he stood tall, sliding the leather gun belt back into position below his gut. You know, you just think about what I told you now, he said with the tip of his hat, and don't be starting no more trouble in my town. As Hinckley walked back towards the car, he heard a deep throat-clearing rasp, followed by a great wad of phlegm spattering against the flagstone behind him. Ignoring the vile display, he moved to the driver's side door and opened it. With one boot in the vehicle, he admired the final gasps of sunset before turning towards Dora to deliver a final parting word. You know, you ain't got a friend in all the world, he said with a wicked grin. I suggest you don't go adding no more enemies to your list, you hear? Oh, there's always room for one more, Dora grumbled from her chair. Hinckley couldn't help but laugh to himself. The audacity. Woman, you ornery as all hell, I'll give you that, he said with a certain glee. Just like your old man. It's that Burleson blood, I tell you. Say, how many bullets was it take to finally kill your daddy? Something like 17, if I recall. It was 18, Dora snapped, and not one in the back neither. Now get the hell off my property. And that's what I've got for you today. Shotgun Woman, everyone. Available everywhere. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for reading that. I remember how colorful Dora was from the first chapter. So I guess we're going to go on to, and after everyone reads, we'll have a Q&A where we can sort of talk about what we've heard this evening. So Dave, would you like to tell us about your book and also read from it a little?
Sure. Beau, that excuse me, that was awesome. I'm gonna order myself a copy. I'll try not to speak or read in the accent either. Yeah, so my book is my first poetry collection, Owl. It just came out last week. I'm out of town and still don't have a copy of it. They're probably waiting for me at home. I signed a copy, so I have touched it, but I don't have a copy yet. So a good chunk of Owl, one of the 4 sections, is written from a place in southwestern Wisconsin, a little tiny town of 121 people called Steuben. I'm actually there now. I normally reside in the San Francisco Bay Area, but I'm up here with family deep in the woods. I'm next to an old dresser that has a pencil sharpener on top of it. And yeah, so I'm going to, the selection that I'm reading from tonight all comes from that section of poems from this area. And the cool thing about this part of Wisconsin is you think of the Midwest as being very flat, but this is called the driftless region, and it's an area where when the glaciers kind of mowed down and flattened the Midwest, they parted and missed this several hundred square mile region, and it's actually quite hilly. And there's lots of cliffs and valleys, and just behind me, a few hundred meters, is the Kickapoo River. This first poem is called Full Summer. Full summer. Rain came early and strong. Now the season is thick. Bugs cloud the woods, bats and swallows at night. Cows, neck high in grass, can't keep up. Children drink mouthfuls of cream before bed, lay in hammocks, dream of owls, grow inches at night. In the day, they jump from the trees into the crooked river. One boy, blonde and sunburnt, gashes his soul on a tree root. Blood flows between his fingers, clutching his foot. He cries, but knows this too will soon mend. A hawk spirals up on a draft. Farmers mark the towering corn. This next one is called Edna Larson, and it's sort of it's a little bit of an elegy, a little bit of a biographical poem about a woman that we used to buy eggs and milk from. Edna Larson. No salt scrub nor chemical peel ever shined that face. Not Edna Larson. Only the cadence of 94 summers and 93 winters. One cow farm, round hills, misted valley, every summer night a symphony. The good farm lost to a tornado in 38, hand to mouth for 70 years. Alone in the howling winter, old walls bending. Still awake at 4, relieve the brown cow, knotted, powerful hands. Milk spits into tin pail, steaming. This one is called Unincorporated. There are a lot of unincorporated towns along these country highways. Unincorporated. Barnum, unincorporated. Shoulders a bend in Route 171. Backed by steep hills, crowded with chokecherry, blue ash, jack pine. A thorny, buzzing prairie stretches opposite the road to the mud bank brown river. Almost a town. One general store abandoned. Windows and corners swathed in web. Jars and cans. US 1-gallon jugs entombed in silt. Ancient notices, yellow, brittle, litter the floorboards. 3 or 4 houses, buckled, sloping, junk in the yard. One by the road, white, pallid, luminous, shifts in shadow of the hill's lee. A girl in the window, upstairs, rocking mouthless. This next poem is called The Road Divides. One road rambles, spring-fed shallows, cranes knee-deep, hum of the bog, Queen Anne's lace, beloved master, master love, hand-scooping cold mouthfuls from the moon-shimmered well. Honey skin, hymn sung, lain on wet sod with downy lips and opiate eye. The road descends, the roan mare, foaming tongue, wild-eyed thirst, empty saddle, dangled boot. Mad padding hooves through glacial ravines and gnarled vines, overcome with scent, the blood, the boot, the matted nape. Road of suffering, ruined outpost over Johnson Creek. Egg drop sun, twitching nostrils, spectral silos of Waterloo. The corn had no rain in June. Oh, the quarter ye have found upon the old blue mound, 6 digs of soil, and 4 ye toil the cold black ground. And the last one I'll read tonight is called Cow Barn. Cow barn. Blackbirds spiral from a vacant window. Children wade in shimmering creek, jeans stuck like second skin, hurl rocks at electric wire. Cows steep in cool rushes downstream. Barn swallows, pigeons start from the hayloft at a slammed door. A boy, tentative, aware, his pace slow as sunlight trapped in honey. I scoop him up with one arm, breathe his neck, his yellow head of hay. We lock pulses. His heart blood floods me. I am his servant, this blue gold child. Thanks.
Thank you for such lovely poetry. The imagery is just profound, very profound. Okay, so
Thanks.
next we're going to go with Matt Daly, and then after that we'll talk about everything we've heard. So Matt, would you like to tell us about your book Invisible World, and also read some excerpts for us?
I love that we're in all
You're
parts.
muted.
Oh, I am still?
You're okay now.
I'm okay, good.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that we're from all parts of the country right now. So I'm in Wyoming, in the mountains on the western side. And I guess I'm the one of us that doesn't have this book yet out in the world. The Invisible World is releasing on September 24th. So it's not quite here. I know of 2 copies in existence, one somewhere in my moving boxes. Yeah, it's the second book I published with Unsolicited. The first, Between Here and Home, came out in 2019. I love that we're reading together because I'm so struck by the evocation of places, which is something that's important to me in the work I'm doing these days as well. So I thought I'd read from the final long poem in this book, The Invisible World. There are 2 really long poems, which is kind of new for me, the first and the third. So I have this ancestor who troubles me. I have connections to the Mather family, and this ancestor of mine, Cotton Mather, was a Puritan person who did a lot in those days, including foment the Salem witch trials, which I've known about for a long time, and didn't quite know what to do about it. And then thought I should just start reading some of his work. And I discovered this book called The Wonders of the Invisible World, which struck me as this beautiful title that's basically all about how to find the witches in your neighborhood and what to do about it. And then really strangely, I thought this book was going to be like, I was reading and responding to his work. And I thought this book would be about power and privilege and gender and race. And then it became this sort of series of odes to the natural world that I grew up around in Wyoming that felt like the source of everything good for me. And it was precisely the opposite for Mather, sort of the dwelling place of evil, really. So the poems have taken on this sort of natural tone. So I loved hearing so much of this evocation of place tonight. So I'm going to read from part of this long poem. We'll see how far we get. It's called Plant Apparitions. Observe, my ancestor, white blossoms as columbine. Report the columbine above the ripening whortleberries. Presume red tendrils back to the red of fruiting bodies. Examine the red stain of the plucked fruit. Coral fingertips your convictions. Suspect the family of fruiting bodies, leave the beetle to its mark. Utter the contradictions of these unfamiliar textures. Prove flavor by baring teeth. Scratch the weak dew from the knuckle edge. Give testimony, which is also oath moan. Die cell by cell to the fleeting favor.
Confess to finish or further the inquiry. Witness the uselessness of cuspids in the acquisition of language or of flavor. Call upon the league of leaves, their hidden reddening. Entertain the familiar beetle fingering a fingernail. Divine the passage of the black beetle into the nearby blackness. Unwarranted red, token red, signal red, faltering, forsaking, confessing, gesturing, pranking, malignant red, circumstantial red. What has been called the witch's mark, the witch's words, the witch's deeds, the witch's ecstasies, witness the witch's confessions as you have long done, my ancestor, as if white flowers, aching always lightward. Maybe in the late day, a flame or shadow darted into me. The tree cold beneath itself with spent needles. Late August exhaled. I was a breathing boy, looking forward to light as much as fading. I was beginning a year, and I was familiar with sorceries. To this day, I see things I can't explain and don't bother trying. I still sit in the dirt with my hands. The world goes on, whispering just out of earshot, and the crick in my neck from listening as I watch the needles pile up and feel them brush shoulders of the moraine. Dirt will hold me on the last day, and dirt will also hold me after. I had not been seen by stems back then, but I had tasted them, and I had cut them down. Hungry for sweeter veins of the woods, I plucked and sipped grasses, popped clover heads, buggy and full into my boy mouth for the flood of crushed cells. Among ghost shadows of summer pines, I extracted the flutes of columbine one at a time to nip the slim tip and let what sweet they kept for hawk moths, which looked like hummingbirds among the mottled shadows of summer pines, roll sweetly down my tongue's spine. Time passed, and more of me grew barked and gulled. I grew into my fragile hungers, and I knew how to hold their dusted pulse. The white flowers looked less and less like secret treats and more like little wings of a stillness I reached for without talons or clutch. I didn't know poison ivy grew along the red rock canyon streams until I stood knee-deep in its red stems, or that such a thing as bighorn sheep lived anywhere except carved into some canyon wall, until the rams and ewes stood all around me. When my legs began to burn and blister, I waded crotch deep into the canyon stream to let the water calm me. I didn't know that standing in any wild place I'd never been before could feel like anything but lust, and I still don't know any other feeling. Those parts of my animal body that can only be called flanks quiver and itch, and whatever live skin brushes my live skin welts me as I slip through folds of leaves toward the cold tug of clear water. I fished for trout in the deep pools, trout raised in a hatchery cinder-blocked around the spring that fed the tanks full of fry and couldn't help itself but pour outward toward the ocean bound. The later river, I have read, no longer rushes with any urgency toward the hips of the sea. A fragment of some forgotten stone lodged in my right hand, pointer finger, fist knuckle, after I struck the pre-shattered rock in a splitting blow from a hammer no one in our cabin house minded I used for my rock hounding. I don't remember goggles or glasses, so what became part of me could have been worse. That was a boyhood time when my boy self cottonwooded. Now, in this later, too warm summer, a leaf prickle from a Canada thistle lances my opposing thumb and leaves its initial pierce inside me. I believe the meat of me. It throbs when I work the mark it made, but I do not call my doctor, who was a neighbor in the rock-smacking days, to have him cut it away. I grow neither leaf-like nor calcified in what has come to resemble a tumble of seasons. I fill up, digit by digit, with shards, the piles of sharp ends of the left unclobbered wild, and I try not to let go, of their not letting me go. Fall hawthorn branches, laden with wax wings, and hard fruit of skin-gripped seeds. Sun-up thorns sting the frost-laden arc, every flutter of my wicked cells in mourning. One at a time, the flocks go a little farther away to that dull place beyond where nothing but what you, my ancestor, say is blessed, ripening around a seed loosed, reathery and groundward. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for a wonderful reading. So now we have the Q&A part. And I have to say, overall, I'm really amazed at how I'm a city girl. So I'm really amazed at how much all of you know about the nature, like what plants are, what hawthorns look like, what flowers are. So is that something that you learned throughout your lives, or is that something that you had to research as you were writing? So talk about how you incorporated nature or place into your work. And I guess we could either go in alphabetical order. We could start with the poets, whoever wants to go first.
I can jump in. Just being in this farmhouse, there were plant books and bird books, and walking around here and riding horseback when I was a kid. My dad was able to name a lot of things and would always name them and repeat them, and then also research on top of it, because I don't retain things very well. And also, of course, now there are apps that identify things, which is helpful. But I think I love the practice of learning the vocabulary of the flora and fauna around us. It's just a great way to, get in the detail of what's around you. But I'm still a total beginner.
Could have fooled me. So, Matt, do you want to talk about how you got all that nature? I sort of was amazed when the character, the protagonist, walks in the water after having to calm the poison ivy. I'm a true city girl. I've never had poison ivy. Don't ever want to have it, but I know it's bad. So is that a real thing that people do, is to walk in the stream when people have poison ivy? Or is that an imaginative plot twist?
I don't know if it's a thing people do, but it's a thing someone did once, when he may or may not have brushed against poison ivy and didn't know what it was until someone else said what it was. So I love that too. I really love that notion of like discovering the world. I'm really fascinated both by knowing the other, the more than human world around me. I live in a place that's something of my county is like 93% or something is publicly owned. And so there's a lot of wild nature here. But I also love the common names. I think that like common names of the world around us say a lot about how people have engaged with that, So I felt so struck by that listening to you all tonight, like how these places that I don't know very well. I spent a little time in Wisconsin. I've spent no time in the Southeast, and how the places come to light in the language of the place. Feels really beautiful to me.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate.
Yeah, I was going to say, Beau, we get a real sense of place.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the sense of place. I really appreciate all of the nature influence in everyone's work. I think that's a very interesting thing, to take three writers who don't know each other, and that's seems to be a very heavy theme in all of the work. I grew up in Texas, and kind of hanging around ranches and stuff. There's kind of not a lot to do except walk around in the wilderness and just look at stuff and observe things, observe animals, try and find animals, look at plants. And I don't know, there's almost like a lore associated with, certain plants, and things have certain uses. I almost think in Texas, there's the environment is somewhat inhospitable. And, as someone else mentioned, that this idea of how people have, used nature to better their lives, or to survive in an inhospitable place. What, aloe vera on sunburns, and what can you use this plant to do? I've always kind of been fascinated by that, and how people were able to live in very challenging places, which people have been doing for an extremely long time. So yeah, I've just always kind of grown up with that. Maybe not top of mind, but it's kind of always something my dad used to talk about, just how you can use the environment around you, which I always was kind of fascinated by. And it's just, yeah, definitely something that came out in the work a lot.
So we have a question from one of our listeners. Tara Meyer wants to know, was the last reading an apathetic acquiescence of death or loving embrace? So Matt, I think that's directed toward you.
Yeah, wow. I think that what's really surprised me about the poems, is how they felt like these celebrations of my relationship with the natural world. In this book, I didn't expect it really, but so I don't know that. I mean, I think something that I love living in a wild place is how like these vibrant expressions of living beauty and mortality are like all wrapped up in each other. Like, the beauty of the natural world has to do with its own fading to me somehow. And so I'm taking the dodge and saying maybe both, in answer to that question, that somehow like it's this, the way that being at the edge of mortality in the wild world, it feels like the place where this beauty surges forth to me. So, yeah.
A very profound answer. So, I like to talk about in sense of place. Also, the characters come through. In Beau's, Eudora is certainly a pistol, even though she has a pistol in between her legs. Can you talk a little bit about how you came up with this hard scrabble woman who takes no prisoners, and she seems to be smarter than the police officer that came by? Would you like to talk about her character a little bit?
Of course, yeah. I think the character was certainly inspired by real characters. I think almost all of the characters in the novel come from various characters that I encountered in Texas. The main character, Eudora, was definitely inspired by both of my grandmothers. I think that was a very fascinating generation. Both of my grandparents grew up as young women during the Great Depression, so you kind of have this immediate grit, this immediate toughness to them. They did not sympathize too much with any sob stories because of the way that they were brought up. Both of them were raised on farms or kind of ranches. One of my grandmothers, there's only one picture of her as a child, and she's standing barefoot out in a barren field. So I think it's just, these are the types of characters that I kind of, grew up with in my life, and I always found them very inspiring. And I grew up watching a lot of like spaghetti westerns as a kid. Clint Eastwood, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and while those lead characters were always super fascinating, and I kind of worshipped them as a kid. just as I got older, I kind of thought to myself, I was like, my grandmother was actually more of that character than my grandfather was. She was the more of the hard nosed. My grandfather was a nice guy, but my grandmother didn't take any nonsense from anybody. And so I always kind of thought, like, if her as a character kind of manifested in like this, something that was like a Western, what would that look like? It would probably almost be more entertaining. So yeah, that's where the inspiration came from.
I got to jump in and say that I love that you said that, because the cinematic quality of that scene, now like the reference point, I'm like thinking about all those old Westerns. It's so beautiful, and also sort of connects to that natural world discussion too, right? Like, if you look away from the action of the scene, how the cinematographers like framed it so beautifully. And I loved how in your scene building there, like the action was, I was so zeroed in on the action, and then you'd give us that like description of the place that just like brought the whole scene to life to me. So I love that.
Love to hear that. Yeah, definitely a huge influence was cinema, and yeah, especially the Western films that I grew up watching, for sure. Yeah, love to hear that came through.
Still have a question for Dave. One of the things that struck me about your poetry is the image. I really remember the birds spiraling out of the trees. So I was wondering, can you talk a little bit about your metaphors and your images, how you came about that? Is it just through observation of nature, or inspiration when it comes down to actually sitting down and doing the writing, and it just comes? Do you have an image in mind? How does that work for you?
It's probably pretty light on metaphor and more just observation. I just try to follow what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, and then sometimes that will lead to insights about what I'm feeling or figuring out. But I just try to write it as close to, it's like painting it, which I can't do. So I'm just trying to describe it as best I can, as simply as I can. And I do draw a lot of, as we've been talking about, I draw a lot of inspiration from what is happening around me. And it's not, it's often nature, but I also draw a lot of imagery from traffic and, the human-made world.
All the poetry that we've heard tonight is very profound and very the images are just arresting. And Beau, your story, I remember it as you were reading. I remembered how incredible Eudora was in the lawyer's office. So let's talk a little bit about the writing process. Some aspiring writers listen to this streamed reading. So how do you approach writing? Are you disciplined writers where you write every day? Do you carry a journal? Do you keep a journal where an idea comes to you and you write it down? Do you write your observations down? So let's just go in a round robin way to talk about each individual's approach to the writing process.
I guess I'll jump in, since the answer is I don't have much of one right now. That happens to me like between larger projects. I feel like things sort of gather momentum, and then there's this period of just kind of noodling around. So I tend to work in the morning and try to like do a draft of a poem in a paper journal as much as I can. And then it feels like something starts to gather momentum from that. And then that becomes like a project. I'm someone who really likes a project, and so once it feels like there's a group of poems that are starting to go somewhere, then I can really get into a more focused writing practice myself, kind of diving more directly into that project, as opposed to just not just, but like that really fun period of like messing around and seeing what might emerge. Yeah.
For me, structure is important. You know, when I was writing a novel, it was it was a daily practice. For poetry, it's more like a weekly practice. Like I need to write a poem a week. That's kind of my. It doesn't have to be good, and most of them aren't, you know. But and then some weeks I'll have, you know, one thing I love doing is ekphrastic poetry. You know, writing in response to art. So I try to take a day, a month or two, every month or two off work, and just go to a museum and just write. And I'll, you know, have several drafts on a day like that. If I go on a writer's retreat or a workshop, I'll, you know, obviously clock more, but at least a poem a week. That's kind of like my vitamin. And then I also try to revise once a week. So, you know, I write in a journal at the back of my regular, like daily journal. And I usually go through one of those a quarter. And in addition to the writing one a week, I'm also have a revision practice where I'm pulling a journal from a couple of years ago. And that, so I don't revise usually until I let it sit for a while, and then I revise. And then I'll go through more revisions before I submit and try to get published and stuff.
Yeah. For writing a novel, again, this is my my first complete novel. I before I
Beau?
dabbled. Sorry, what's that? Yeah, so before kind of getting into the novel, I dabbled a lot in short stories. I'm a writer by profession for just advertising, which is a whole different type of writing. Yeah, with the novel, again, I had thought a lot about just story arc, and I kind of researched this thing that's very common with script writing of like the hero's journey and kind of like how that functions. And I felt like I had a lot of the story figured out, but there were certain elements that were missing. And I kind of used like the hero's journey and also just again like a lot of references from cinema for how you create a story from start to finish and how like the pacing and the flow should go. So kind of once I had that outlined, yeah, it's just a very long process of writing a novel, daily practice for sure. You know, I think I got to the point where I was saying like 500 words, which is about a page, just every day. Even if it wasn't good, even if the next day you go back and just delete everything that you wrote and start over. I really do feel that the cliche of you have to get it on the page and you have to get it out to get to the good stuff. So even if you write something that's bad, it's almost like it is a necessary practice to get to something good, which can be frustrating and can make the process feel laborious. But yeah, just working on it every single day, getting a draft done. And then just once your draft is done, you know, maybe you take a couple of days off and then you just get right back to it and start on page 1, chapter 1, and you just go through and revise. And the revision process was tough for me. I have a hard time. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I have a hard time stopping myself from fiddling with things because there's always a different way you could say something. There's always a different way you could say something, and maybe there's a more concise way, and maybe there's a more clever way you could say something, or a more philosophical way you could say something. And I almost feel like that process can never end. But that's why deadlines are great. I think you have to have deadlines like that to keep yourself honest, and you just do the absolute best that you can up until the deadline, and then it's time to hand it over and let somebody else read it. So yeah, that's definitely the process I followed.
That's a really good answer. Tara has another question. And this is to everyone. Where's the weirdest place you have ever gotten an idea for a story or a poem? So let's start with Dave, and then go to Matt, and then Beau. The weirdest place you've ever gotten an idea for a story or a poem.
Man, That's a great and interesting question. I mean, I've traveled a lot, and I write when I travel. I love, writing stuff when I travel. So I've been to a lot of different kinds of places. But that, to me, that's not weird. That's just a great source, seeing things. It's almost I'm almost inclined to say that the more mundane, the more boring, like the doctor's office poem, the waiting, waiting to get a test or an X-ray or something, which I have done, and it's it's a little bit harder to draw inspiration from those kind of settings and situations. So I'll go with that as my answer. Hospital waiting room.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. Because I was thinking about that when you were, Dave, when you were talking about travel as something that really like it. I love to travel too, and see new places and think that it's going to be really inspiring. But it's like, I just dropped my son off for college, and the airport in Gunnison, Colorado, was like really fascinating to me, with 2 employees and no one else there, and like me. Was actually where the poem I thought was interesting got started, weirdly. So I think I love this question. Like, the weirdest places are those places where there's nothing inspiring. I think it feels really kind of cool, like, what's here other than the what's on the surface, So
Yeah, that's funny that y'all mentioned that, because I don't know, it's almost like places that just evoke some type of strong reaction for me are interesting for some reason. There's the scene that I read in the previous reading takes place in a just kind of like a musty old kind of like estate lawyer's office, like, and it's just that feeling like of when you're like sitting in someone's like insurance office, and it's like you don't want to be there at all and you can't wait to get out of there. It's like, and I don't know, there's something about that where it's like just that feeling for me. It came through in the book of just how it's just these sad little places, and you just want to get out of there so bad, and get back in the sun almost. I don't know, there's something very interesting about that. But for like the majority of my book, is obviously heavily influenced by Texas, and it's a place that I grew up in. Right after college, I left and haven't lived there since. But I'll shout out to James Joyce. This idea of kind of like, I never really had an idea about writing a book about Texas until I left, and then I don't know, there's something about it where it's not like an obsession, but I don't know, it's just like a place that has had a big influence on your life, I suppose. And even if you've been living somewhere else for 12 years, it's kind of like always on your mind in a way, kind of like consumes your thoughts in some strange way. So yeah, I definitely think it took me leaving and living somewhere else for the rest of my adult life to write a book about it, I think.
So our last question for each of you is, as I said, a lot of aspiring authors and even seasoned authors listen to this streamed readings. So what is the one advice, or what is the advice that you want to give other writers about the process, or about the profession, or about the publishing process, or just being writers, the writing life? What advice do you want to tell a newbie out there who wants to get started, and who aspires to be where you are now at, with a book, or several books published? So I guess we'll start with Dave, and then we'll go to Matt, and then we'll end up with Beau.
I would say there's two pieces. One is to really seek out and embrace feedback, and the best way to do that is in community. Writers groups, retreats, online workshops, whatever. I remember, when I was a freshman in college, I brought a stack of poems to my creative writing teacher, and he sort of was like, "Oh, okay." And a few weeks later, when he gave me feedback, it crushed me. I didn't write for a couple of years after that. And you got to it took me a while to get used to it, but it's such a critical part of the process. So feedback is one, and the other is Stephen Pressfield's books, The War of Art and Turning Pro, sort of encapsulate this. But and we were talking about this in terms of the writer's process, have a work person's like approach to it. It's not about the muse. It's not about lightning striking. It's not about being a genius. It's about doing the work and being consistent about it, and having a process and trusting the process, because you're not always inspired.
Wonderful words.
I was going to say, I'm really glad and intimidated to follow Dave here these last couple of times. It's beautiful. Because I feel the same way. To me, it's about community, like the great joy and surprise. Like, if it's not fun, this effort to like put things down in words and then get it out into the world, where like 4% of the time you might be successful at reaching anyone that you didn't just hand it to personally. It's got to be about love and community, it seems to me, and I've found so much more community among writers and writing with people and engaging with readers, then that's what fills me more than publication. Sometimes that happens because things get published, but thinking about community feels really important to me. And I can't remember where this came from, but the other piece, Dave said two, so I'm going to give two, is like how our writing is a gift to someone else. And like it's real life is when you let go of it, feels really important to me. Like I sort of feel like there's that conversation in craft classes about not getting precious. But to me, it's less about like what I think about it as opposed to how is this for someone else. Whenever I ask that question, the thing I'm working on feels like it gets better, because it's not about me anymore. Like it's not that like writer off in their corner doing something. It's about an offering into the world to try to do something for somebody else. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, great
And
answer.
Beau?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the workman's mentality. I think if you, especially for a novel, I think there's a lot to get through, and if you sit around waiting for inspiration, you're going to be writing that novel for the rest of your life, I think. So I definitely agree with that. And then another thing I think maybe a little bit more optimistic for the writers out there is when in doubt, I think you really have to stick to your own internal voice and write stuff that you like. I think you only have your brain, and you only have there's a lot of comparison out there. There's many writers that I really look up to, and I think their work's fantastic, and it's kind of hard to look at my work like in comparison to their work, but we'll never be the same person, and they probably can't write what I'm writing, even if they wanted to, which they probably don't. But I think what you have to trust is like your internal voice and what you think is cool, and that's like all you have. And I took a lot of inspiration from like rock musicians and like punk rock bands, especially. It's like they go up on stage and they play what they think is cool, and everyone in the audience can think that it's not good or it doesn't sound good, but it's like when the band is on stage, they play what they think, what they believe in, and then you walk up, and that's all you can do with your work. You can't control if the world thinks it's like Pulitzer Prize winning work, but if it's something that you believe in, then that's all you've got to go off of.
Bravo, bravo. I just want to add one note. I was listening to the author Samia Ali, and she said that writers who are in the midst of their work often compare themselves to writers who are already published. They're already published works, not realizing that those published works have already been through vetting and editing and is as perfect as those works are going to get. So she said, try not to compare yourself to those published books whose works have already been vetted and edited and all that. All right, this is it for this evening, and I want to thank everyone who's been watching. I love all the comments and the questions. Thank you very much for those. I also would like to thank our wonderful readers tonight. I always feel very inspired, so I'm going to go back and in my work write about birds that spiral and suns that yawned. I really was admiring the strong verbs and that contributed to the images of your work. So thank you very much. Good night, everyone, and please join us for our next reading on September 4th, 8:30 Eastern Standard Time and 5:30 Pacific Time. So we hope you'll come back and join us. And thank you so much for listening in this evening. Good night, everyone, and thank you.
Thanks, Rosalia.